The survival genre has many different layers, from surviving a vast open world filled with dinosaurs, to surviving the tropical island hellscape surrounded by cannibals. Survive with your friends against nature and foes alike. It goes without saying that the survival genre has many different types of games to satisfy, almost every single one of them with the focus on the collective survival. There are a few games that goes against the grain on the traditional survival genre, namely The Long Dark, a game where you must venture out against the cold frigid boreal wasteland in the Canadian wilderness, facing Mother Nature in full force. And you must do so alone. With me to discuss this game in detail, we have Drake, an animator, illustrator, game designer, artist, comic book writer, woman, and worse yet, Swedish. A surprisingly funny person, which is a rarity for the people cursed with the double X mark of the chromosomes.
Everything is being squashed and you have a little parasite inside of you that is growing. Well, they have to cut up the baby.
What?
So every time a doctor has to cut up a baby, for example, it takes about 6 weeks for the vagina to be back to normal.
Drake, you have not played The Long Dark yourself. What do you think of the game?
From what I've seen so far, it is a very interesting game of survival. It kind of asks yourself, like, the questions, what would you do in this situation? And it's very harsh. But it's also very interesting because I like the art style they went with the game as well. It's almost like The Walking Dead, in a way.
They are walking a lot, so that makes sense.
Minus the zombies.
Yeah, everyone's just dead.
Everybody is just mysteriously dead, and there's no explanation as to how that happened. There is no apocalypse, there is no worldwide virus.
So there is no Walking Dead. Or if you want to be philosophical, you are the Walking Dead.
All I understand is that there is this very vast, cold, limited resources, and the answer is still unknown as to why or how it happened. Which adds more to a story kind of a field. Like, I'm pretty sure you can roleplay and you can come up with your own conclusions of what happened. But at the end of the day, the game is doing a genius idea of letting it be wide open for the people who play it to figure it out or come up with their own conclusions.
Yeah, they do have these things called Wintermute and also the story mode, where you do see people in the world, but in the sandbox mode, which is the vast majority of people who are playing it, you are completely alone. And you just have to understand something that has happened in the world. For example, if you play it long enough, you'll come across these towers, and they can be repaired with like few electronical things and batteries and fuses scattered around the area. And once you do that, you actually start to understand this, like there's still a signal somehow alive in this world without electricity, without like everything that once was. Under this thing known as the aurora light, where everything slowly comes back to life, there is something hidden in the world. There are bunkers scattered around the world, there are wolves patrolling every places, and there's also this overlapping mystery between this different kind of doctor and the one from the gameplay itself. Astrid, who is going somewhere. The aurora light hits out of nowhere. It's like a solar flare and all technology just stops. And that is the moment that you find yourself in the wilderness, thrown from the plane in a random location in the world. And now you have to survive.
That kind of reminds me of the Chernobyl accident, or well, the horrors that happen in Chernobyl, because the animals, or well, I should start with the whole area is full of radioactive, I don't want to call it energy, but it's radioactive, so the animals the animals have just evolved to be not affected by it so much. Well, even today, we as humans cannot live with it, which is why I was like, when I found out about the Aurora wolves, because there are some wolves who do have the Aurora, they come off as far more dangerous and far more terrifying, I think. And that was kind of interesting to me because that just reminded me like, oh, so they are infected with something that makes them more terrifying or more, I don't know, I don't want to say aggressive, but they are working in a different way. They're far more terrifying than the regular wolves in the game, if I have understand that correctly.
Yeah, they absolutely are. When the Aurora is active in the game, the wildlife surrounding them, for example bears and wolves, are much more dangerous. They have a heightened sense of smell, so they can detect you from further away. But they are also more visible, so you can actually see them in the night.
Ooh.
So they get a glow at the same time that the Aurora is active. As the game progresses, you are put down in this very hostile world. You don't know where you are. Depending on when you get put down in the world, it can be midday, it can be in the middle of the night, it can be sunshine out, or it can be in the middle of a blizzard.
Oh dear. You don't want to end up in a blizzard, you're dead.
Pretty much. Well, the appeal of this game, when you're just into it, is literally like it would be in real life. You have survived a plane crash,
Yeah.
and because it's cold, you have to find shelter, you have to find food. If you are injured, you have to find a way to heal yourself as quickly as possible so you don't bleed out or you get an infection or anything of the sort.
Or you freeze to death.
That is the constant fear in this game.
Freeze to death. Freeze to death. I'm sorry.
Pretty much.
But yeah, in a way, this whole survival thing reminds me a lot of Ark. Unfortunately, I was introduced to the survival genre through Ark, which I feel like has kind of tainted my experience with survival games. Because while Ark is interesting and is very, I don't know, it feels like it took over because there's so many cool things you can do. You can build a base, you can gather so much resources, you can either play with friends or you can play alone and you can get all these cool animals. With the Lone Dark, or the Long Dark, not lone, you are literally alone, or you could play with your friends, but there's so much more limitations of what you can do. You can't, for example, build a spaceship. You can't go gather a dragon to help you through the snowstorms. You can't do that. And to me, it makes the game feel more human. Like, sure, there is some fiction into this whole game world, of course, but it feels far more human, and humanity in and of itself can be very terrifying. Nature can be terrifying.
That's a good point, because the developer of the Long Dark said that it was quite literally the opposite of what he wanted to make. He didn't want to make a survival game where you get comfortable. Instead of it being a power fantasy where it's like you go and play Skyrim and no matter what you do, you are the chosen one. If you die in the game, you are just respawning to whatever position you were at next.
Yeah.
In the Long Dark, they do the exact opposite. He refers to it as a vulnerability fantasy, which, if you die in the game, there was no turning back. You died in the game, everything was done. It didn't matter if you spent 1 day in the game, or 10 or 100 days in game. The game was over. Everything that you explored, everything that you crafted of clothes, did you make a bow, did you increase your ability to make better fires, all these skills that you taught yourself from day one, they're just gone now. You have to think about what you're gonna do. If it's a blizzard outside, maybe stay in. Craft something.
Find shelter ASAP.
No, if it's a blizzard outside, that means you're already inside.
But yeah, I like that about it though, because in Ark, for example, you can just respawn wherever, and it doesn't really affect the gameplay. In this game, however, I feel like you have to really think hard how to survive, because you will die a lot, but you will also feel a certain hint of despair, because again, if you are in the middle of a blizzard, you have to find shelter as soon as possible. If you're lucky enough to just be landed in a forest or something, you have to if you're lucky, you'll find an abandoned house and probably can do something to keep yourself warm there. If you're unlucky, you might find a cave and you have a 50% chance of it being already covered by a bear.
But that's also the part of it again. It's like saying, if you played Skyrim and you saw a cave, you would be like, I'm going to go in there no matter what, just run full speed ahead. If you do that in the Long Dark and just run in there, there's a chance that there's going to be a bear in there.
Yeah.
And if the bear is there, it's not going to be like, oh yeah, come on in, bro.
Come in, I won't eat ya. What is the philosophical... Alright. What is the purpose of the Long Dark?
To me, the Long Dark has always been this unrealistic way surviving a plane crash in a cold land where you don't know where you are, you don't know if someone's gonna come and save you. It kind of reminds me of the time where a plane crashed in the Alps, in Peru I believe it was, and all of those people survived. Well, all of the people who survived the crash actually had to find a way to survive. Unlike in real life, in the Long Dark, you can't just become a cannibal, which is, to me, a little bit... Well, there's so many corpses in this world, so it's like... you could survive easier if you just, like, took away the morals of that implication. But the purpose in this game, for me, is that you take your time to do whatever, you risk assessment everything. If the weather is good outside, that is the perfect time to go out and venture. If you see a wolf in the distance, you weigh your options. Should I go around it? Should I attack it? Should I just head back? Because a wolf may not kill you, but if it gets close enough to you and attacks you, it can take away a good amount of your health. And sometimes just in the real world, as in the Long Dark, you weigh your options of what should I do in this case? Do I need the wolf? Because you can't shoot it. You can get the skin of it, guts that you can use for crafting, and you can also skin it for the meat. Although if you eat too much of predator meat in the game, there's a chance to get parasites running through your system. And the more of it you eat, the more of a bad time you're gonna have. You're gonna be fatigued, be more ill.
Alright, next question. So you go through the world and venture out in it all alone. What is the appeal of this game?
Taking your time to explore, to see an unknown world. To go out there all alone means that you're not beholden to other survival games where you and your friends sit around and decide what to do. In this game, every single decision is always yours. If you want to take a risk, if you want to go out and fight something, you can do that. If you want to stay back in the base that you've established, you can start crafting better gear. You can craft bows and arrows. You can find guns in the world, keeping them clean, consume that time. Stay indoors, prepare a little safe stash. There is no rush, because one day in the game, you will have overextended your abilities. Whether it's your fault, overconfidence, or maybe it's because a bear attacked you, and just like that, it can just be over. And I find that is very intriguing about the game.
Like, what is the point? Why do you keep going through it over and over again if your fate is already decided? You're gonna die.
Well, just like in real life, we will all die. But for some people, we all have different priorities in life. Some people are family-oriented, some people are career-oriented, some people love to travel to see the world, broaden the mind and such. Some people just love learning. Everyone is different in that regard. The fact that the game is not high intensity of like action or RPG elements where like quests are given out every single place. This game doesn't really have much of that. It does offer a few quests here and there and special events that happens in the game world. But for the most part, every single decision is something that you decide. Every single task that you get is also something that you say, yeah, this is the thing that we should probably get going now. Because if I don't do this, I'll either starve, freeze to death, or simply just have nothing to drink. So in the same regard as you take care of yourself in life, in this game you also need to understand what you want to do And when you choose to do something, at the same time, you also neglect something else. So it says more about the player, what they want to do, rather than what they always should do.
So what lengths of survival would you go to and sacrifice for it?
The game offers you a broad selection of achievements if you want to be like a good-hearted character, in the sense that you don't really want to kill just for the thrill of killing, but you can go out there and you can say, you know what, I will not destroy nature as much. So you can harvest the plants from nearby rivers and lakes, so you can just eat the chalks and such. In the beginning, you're just very cautious about what should I do to survive. As time progresses and you get more and more comfortable, those resources that you started off with in the world, they're just gone. You can go to houses, of course, and you can see, oh, there's a soda here and some canned peaches. However, at some point, that's not gonna suffice. So you neglect your own morals at a certain point, and you start to do the things that you were gonna do anyway. Go out and hunt rabbits, deer, wolves, and then it just escalates higher and higher and higher. All of a sudden, you find yourself with a gun fighting a moose because you want the meat, but you also want the hide. So you keep going past what you thought you originally wanted to do, because doing something else gives you a better chance to survive.
The challenges and feats to endure in the world, how would you adjust to them?
There are also a lot of challenges in the world. As the Dead Sleeps is one of the more notorious challenges in the community. It's about going through the world, visiting graves of some fallen people that we don't know personally. Whether or not there is a story behind it is still up for debate in the community. I personally think it's one of those ways where they say, like, this person has done something, he tried to help these people in the past, and now as a final farewell, he's gonna visit the graves for one last time before he too will join them in the afterlife. And some of those challenges, once they're completed, will also give you a special bonus in the sandbox world. It can be Blizzard Walker if you're really good at just going through a blizzard for many, many miles. It can be Sprinter if you are starting to run more than I think it was 100 kilometers at some point. Every small little feat in the game is earned through dedication, in the same way that I would say a Cub Scout would actually also get their rewards by showing dedication and skill towards it. The challenges do that. Sacrifice 50 hours to just get something that gets you 20% faster stamina regeneration. And that's only in the sandbox world, not even accounting for the game story that has been in development since 2014 pretty much.
Is there any story behind all of this? Like, there are 2 modes, you mentioned something about that?
There are these 2 modes. There is the sandbox mode where you are placed someplace in the world completely alone. There's no person alive in the world at all. That's just, the entire world is open to you to explore on different settings of difficulties. We have the 2 first ones, which is pretty easy just for newcomers or people who just want to explore the world and landscape in their own time without fear of, being mauled by bears and wolves and moose and freezing to death with frostbite. Then we have the harder ones. We have the Stalker, which is where it gets really hard, but the world still offers like a vast amount of like weaponry. For example, a handgun and a rifle to shoot. But if you go one step above in the sandbox world, we have the thing which was the staple for many veterans of the game, called Interloper. Interloper does the same thing as all the others, but the wildlife and weather and chances of getting sick or ill from something have vastly increased. And there is no handgun, there's no rifle. The only weapon in this game that you can craft is a survival bow. And then you should also have to craft arrows for it and scavenge like wood so you can make the arrows. And that's just the first priority for most people in the game after they can secure those supplies. so that they have a ranged weapon to actually defend themselves against with wolves, and also so they can start hunting game like rabbits, deer, and these birds that's always just on top of the mountain somewhere, so you just shoot them.
Mount Everest, here we come!
There is one of those things. We have Timberwolf Mountain, where there's literally a plane at the very top of the mountain that's crashed into it. Everyone on it is of course dead, but that is nothing new in this world, as literally everyone else is dead. With the Wintermute, where it is an episodic episode where we have two main characters. It's gonna be Will Mackenzie, a pilot from some remote transport area, and then the ex-wife, whose name is Dr. Astrid. Astrid comes to Will asking to transport a special suitcase to a remote part of the Long Dark's world, which is called Great Bear Island. Funny enough, I don't think it is an island, but whatever.
I mean, basic names, basic explanation of areas, basic explanations of places, I guess.
The fun thing is that there are two different types of wolves in this game. There's the regular wolves, and then we have the timber wolves, which the timber wolves hunts in packs of 3 to 4. But they don't exist on Timberwolf Mountain for some reason. So not always is the name's completely correct. Will and Astrid are then traveling in the sky towards this destination that she has wanted Will to take her. But she's very secretive of the content of this briefcase. And then as they are flying above them, the aurora actually hits, and they just crash the plane into the mountainside. And in the first episode, Will awakens, and he is injured on like this cliff, but he has like shelter in a small cave. So he just sits there for like a day and a half, I believe it was, mending his wounds, getting the world introduced to him slowly over time, starts to explore. Now this is the complete opposite of the sandbox, because in Wintermute there are still people alive. So he goes to one place, finds people, and they start to hand out quests, like you should go here and do this for me. This is the point where people prefers it to be the sandbox, because from the very beginning of the game, people have just been used to do whatever they wanted to do themselves. So many people have actually started to take away from these the episodes, which is currently at 4 out of 5 has been made so far.
I mean, based on the visuals that I've seen and the music, let's not forget the soundtrack as well.
Mm-hmm.
It is sounding like a dark version of... How do I explain this? It sounds like a dark version of a wonder that you constantly ask yourself, how would I do it if I was all alone in this winter wasteland? And it's a very interesting thing, and I love the community that is just surrounding it with it. It's kind of ironic, it's a dark setting, but the community, from what I hear, is very positive.
It is without a doubt a very positive communities with the people engaging with each other is mostly positive and feedback given. And through the soundtracks of The Long Dark is very nuanced and specific to every single region. From the simple wolf howl that they just do in the background, in the distant path away from you. They have their own little routines, so their howls echo far out into the vast away field. And the music and world sounds as well have a unique feel to it, because it embraces the fact that you are alone in this world. But it also goes the exact opposite way of saying, just because you are alone here doesn't mean you should just give up or stop. Nature in this game is against you. Nature doesn't care whether or not you live or die. Nature is just there in this game. It doesn't care if you had plans to go out and fish one of the days so you could stack up on more fish for a future expedition. They have no empathy towards whether or not the world wants you in it. And the music conveys that very well with the instrumental use of both violin, piano, small notes and high notes. And the composers of this know exactly how to fit it into every single situation. And again, that is a complete combination of people who understands the vision and the emotion that the game has to present towards them. They don't want an action shooter, they don't want high intensity music. They want gloomy, dark, fearful, optimistic, quiet music to play in the background.
Yeah. I don't know what else to ask. Because I feel like we pretty much covered it all up. It's, and I love that you say Canada, because when I first saw the visuals, I almost imagined Sweden. So for me, it's like, it doesn't really matter if you say it's Canada, it's Sweden, it's Finland, it's America. It's like, in a way, you could almost replace the Canada part and just say you're in a wilderness of winter, and it could be like anywhere. And that's what I also like about it.
It is also a Canadian studio, to be fair, so they were partly inspired by their own wilderness and their
Fair.
own wildlife, which isn't too dissimilar from the Scandinavian wildlife, well, except Denmark, because everything has been exterminated here.
Ouch.
Norwegian is very similar, like, to some of the mountain areas of the Long Dark, for example. And some of the northern forests of Sweden could easily be mistaken from one or the other. Plants are pretty much identical to anything that is close to a boreal existence anyway. So it doesn't change the fact that the environment is just a frigid, cold place where people don't tend to dwell much in big cities. But at the same time, this is a good thing for the Long Dark in itself, and for you as the survivor. In this world, from what we can gather, there's been a massive solar flare. In the case of what happened in the 1800s, where a solar flare hit Earth, which caused horses to actually fall down dead, and what little electricity and technology we actually had back then that actually used some of the same methods that we use to this day. If the solar flare were to hit today again, like it did in the 1800s, planes would literally fall out of the skies. Some satellites would just cease connection to everything because the solar flare hit them in the wrong time at the wrong place. So if you were to crash somewhere, I believe that the Long Dark, setting it in this mostly isolated area, is a good place to survive. Cities, in this case, would be overwhelmed with looting and crime, and supply chains would just simply cease to exist in the modern world that we have today.
Yeah, like, it gives too much of human conflict here in the Long Dark. Long Dark, sorry. In the Long Dark, it's like, this is you versus nature that has been affected by this aurora light. And you don't know what aurora light is. It's like chaos with nature, but it's not the chaos you would see in Hollywood where the vines go crazy or the weather goes crazy. No, it's like, this is like subtle chaos, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's a great point actually. This is chaos, but just like nature. Nature is chaos. But in this regard that you're saying that this is nature, like Mother Nature is chaos in its own way. But the way that you describe it is almost like this is chaos in the normal way. Because what would you define chaos in the Long Dark?
Yeah, that's what I like about it. Like, yeah, we can have all the fantasy games of natural disasters, natural chaos, and everything. But here it feels so subtle and it makes it more terrifying in a way.
The uncertainty that you find terrifying, or the fact that you have to survive alone in a world that once was completely connected to everything else with just a plane ride from one part of an isolated island, and you could be in a metropolitan.
Because in the city, I feel like, okay, that would be more fitting for like zombies. Again, with the zombies. But here, I think in the woods, it wouldn't make too much sense because in the woods, the nature is there and the animals are there. in the city, it makes more sense to have like zombies.
That would be a completely different thing, because in a city, you would never really survive alone no matter what. You would be a survivor against many other survivors as well. And here in the Long Dark, it's the exact opposite. You are a survivor in a world without survivors. That is, of course, the sandbox version. Wintermute offers a complete story about overcoming adversity. In Wintermute, the Aurora hit technology is no longer active. All the systems that we once had are now null and void. Things can easily be unlocked with the door now, as Long Bear Island is also home to a prisoner penitentiary. A bunch of prisoners have freed themselves and is now a major faction in the Long Bear Island, and is trying to establish control by taking whatever they can. Mathis, who's the self-proclaimed leader of these prisoners, is strong-arming his way into everything and is actually creating a massive conflict around this briefcase that Astrid had. And we still don't know what it is. What could be so important for Astrid to pretty much sacrifice her own life, and that of Will as well? There is this final thing that's also a little bit strange about the Long Dark story modes. On Steam, on Steam, you can see, as always, the achievements that people are having when they complete something, when they die for the first time. And sometimes, you know, people don't really mind those statistics, or there are also episodic achievements. And how many people do you think have completed one of these episodes?
But yeah, I really like how also the game developers just keeps on, and for going back to the art style, they keep updating.
Answer my goddamn question.
I'm sorry, I forgot. Could you repeat? I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
12 seconds later.
I don't think a lot of people have. I think like maybe 13%.
Almost 11%.
That was close!
Yeah. Which beckons the question, it's like, when such a few amount of people in the fan base are playing it episodically.
I don't think a lot of people do it. I think people would rather go in and make their own story.
Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah, so my answer is yes. They don't follow the story, they just make up their own story.
Oh yeah, but you know, there's sandbox and then there is story mode. The vast majority is, of course, playing the sandbox.
Yeah.
But from a game developer perspective, wouldn't it be better if the developers of The Long Dark deprioritized the episodes and just focused on the sandbox?
I think yes, but then they run into the problem of being like every other survival game.
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't consider that one.
Yeah, because again, with Ark, the story is moving forward if you pay attention to the papers, or well, like if you find the artifacts and pay attention to all the characters. I say characters in quotes. Pay attention to the information that is written upon the files that they leave behind that you gather up in the game. If you pay attention to them, there's a story, and if you follow that story, then yeah, you're basically following the story. If you ignore it all together, you're basically in the sandbox and you just make up your own story. And I feel like in every other survival game, they just toss you in a world where you have to survive against either monsters or nature or whatever, and they give you no story and you just come up with your own story. And I think it's interesting because in a way, you could make the argument that The Long Dark is 2 games in 1. Because if you follow the storyline, it could be very much like the Walking Dead games. But if you just play the sandbox, it basically is any other kind of survival game that is out there so far. So in a way, they have combined 2 kind of ways of telling a survival story into one. or well, one survival game into two different ways of playing. And I just have to applaud to the game developers on this one, because it is so fascinating that they were able to take the genre of survival game and make it like it is one game, but depending on if you choose to be in the sandbox or if you're following the storyline, it becomes two different games.
Some of these characters that you meet in the game, they have so much personality with you. Will, who meets one old hunter, who is a wise wilderness man. They sit around a campfire, talking about it. He feels sorry for Will. And then he says in a spectacular voice acting session, it's like, "My days are nearly done, but you have to live with what remains." Literally symbolizing that the world that they knew is already gone. And it's not gonna return to the way that it once was. The main villain of the story, Mathis, who's just taken over a prison and now runs it like a small little kingdom. Like, the hate and anger and viciousness in his voice alone. I hate this man. I want him dead. But damn, he's so fucking cool.
Isn't that kind of what you want for all villains to be like? You want to hate them, but they're also very cool, which is really great.
This is literally the point. It's like, oh, there was this guy, he was inspiring, and this old man was deep. But all of these characters just exist within the story mode alone. The characters in the story mode are so interesting. The knowledge of doing a gameplay that you know that is episodic means that crafting and building and skinning and whatever you're gonna do doesn't matter in the long run. The story is gonna end there. And whatever progress you had in the episode.
But it's interesting you say that the episodes are kind of disappointing, or if I understand it correctly, you find the storytelling lacking? Or what is it that makes these episodes not as great as you want them to be? Like, what would you add? Because it seems like you like the villain and you like Astrid, but there's something you want more.
Like, the premises of all of these tasks sounds amazing. You save a man from near death from a bear, as apparently immortal or something, and you have to kill it with a certain spear. But the gameplay is so dragging it out. The episodes and characters are very interesting. The story in itself is also worth watching and listening to. Part of me just feels like the gameplay doesn't belong in this. The episodic parts almost feels like you just have to do a little bit of gameplay and then you earn a cutscene of what is gonna happen. You don't have any decisions to make, really. You don't really have an impact of the story like you would in Telltale's games for The Walking Dead, for example.
Okay, so you feel like there's a certain dragging to the whole story instead of getting to the good part.
Essentially, yeah.
Fair enough, fair enough. So let's end it like this. So, to end this podcast, we will end this question simply with this.
We will end this question?
Shut up.
Let's end this question. Oh, you did.
No.
You ended the question. Well done.
Shut up! So we're gonna end this podcast with this question.
Mm-hmm.
Why should you and anyone else who have not played The Long Dark play it? Why should they?
People who have played this game are of many different paths. There are people who have struggled with PTSD. Some people from horrible backgrounds like military and such, or been out for a traumatic experience in their life. They have written to the developers and saying that this game was nothing what I expected it to be, just being allowed to explore and open their own mind up to just take things as they see them coming is also a very intriguing way to approach a game as a casual player, perhaps. Because this game offers two things. It offers a world to explore for people who just wants to explore it. But in my opinion, it also opens up the ability to say, this game world is a lonely world. You wander in it alone. You face challenges that you have to overcome over time. The elements are always against you. In the same way, you could say it like, the world is literally against me. And you can reflect on that as well and say, even though the world is against me, even though I'm tired and cold, you can still keep going. And that is the appeal of this game for me. The reason why you should play The Long Dark is to see how long you can survive. The Long Dark.